Sorry for that wait. It's a secret thing that we do. We give the camera some time to just fix themselves while somebody walks up on the stage. My name is Amitod Singh. I'm a regulatory reporter based in India, passionate about Australia, Asia, and of course, everything that happens in the US, which I still am trying to figure out, as you guys can understand. Thank you for being here. It's a big day for all of us. Let's just bring up all our guests right now very quickly on the stage, and then we get the ball rolling. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, round of applause is good. Thanks. Please. This sofa does sink in a little bit. All right. I'll quickly introduce our guests. They don't need much introduction if you've been following the crypto regulation space. But with us right now is Dr. Lisa Cameron, MP. She's a member of the UK Parliament and chair of the Crypto and Digital Assets All-Party Parliamentary Group. She's right here with us. She's a bit jet-lagged. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
We also have Ryosuke Yoshida, and if I've butchered your name, I really do apologize. It happens to us. We were discussing our names right now, a short while back, and we're butchering each other's names. That's fine. The Chief FinTech Officer, the Financial Services Agency in Japan, very interesting individual. He was also on a panel yesterday. Brian Yo is from the Middle East. He's the Director of the FinTech Abu Dhabi Global Market. Much appreciated you joining us. And of course, Marianne Bechara, she's a Senior Counsel at the IMF. Thank you so much for being with us. All right, I just want to get started with you. I ended on you particularly because of that, because we're going to just zoom out before we talk about crypto regulation around the globe, try to understand what is the role really of the IMF right now. And I say this given that I'm from India, where if you're not aware right now, there's the G20 presidency and India is the president. It's taken it upon themselves to come up with crypto regulation that is coordinated, that tackles this problem of cross-border settlements, and that this really cannot happen without consensus and coordination of all nations around the globe. Otherwise, it just won't work. And that's why they've roped in the IMF and the Financial Stability Board. So I just want to understand where you are right now on that, because your paper is supposed to come up at the end of India's G20 presidency around September or October. How's that coming along?
All right, so thanks a lot for this, because there's a lot of international financial organizations out there doing a lot of work in the area. So the IMF is trying to shape the global agenda for 190 members that we have. So our membership is really near universal, and it's not limited to advanced economy. Mm-hmm. It also covers, and we would like to bring in the perspective of the low-income countries and the emerging economies, because a lot of crypto action is happening over there. And our mandate is a little bit broader than the other institutions like the FSB and the BIS. We work on economic, financial, and monetary stability. Having said that, we're supporting what we call the standardizers like the FSB and the BIS. As you mentioned, we're going to be working on a synthesis paper with the FSB. We've also published a G20 note on the macro implication of crypto adoption. And we've issued in February a board paper. It was our first paper or publication adopted by our board on crypto assets. We are offering to the world 9 elements and offering to the governments 9 elements, guiding elements on how to approach crypto and the risks of crypto, because we have been getting a lot of questions from our members on how to approach crypto. Now, the board paper is not only about regulation. It's also about the macroeconomic aspects that is really at the core of the mandate of the IMF. I'll be happy to
we'll get into that. We'll get into that. But just very quickly, briefly answer this question for me. When the G20 said, well, we need the IMF because the FSB has been coming up with their own position, did that indicate for an instance to the people who are unfamiliar with how global regulation is coordinated and how everyone's opinion is really taken? Did that indicate to anyone who's unfamiliar with that, wait, is the IMF suddenly the captain of global crypto rulemaking?
Not at all. So we're, again, our mandate is really the macroeconomy, so the fiscal, the monetary policy, the CFM of the world, but also the regulation. But we are fully aligned with what the standard setters like the FSB are presenting in the world of regulation, which is only one component.
Yeah, but I'm going to challenge that whether you're fully aligned.
Go ahead.
Okay, we're going to do that in a bit.
I
want to bring in right now Brian. He is the director of FinTech Abu Dhabi Global Market. And this is interesting because the UAE has 7 Emiratis, and Abu Dhabi is just one of them. Dubai is a place where, for example, Indian entrepreneurs who are afraid of what's happening in India have gone offshore. And if you're unfamiliar, that might just happen in the US, as you guys know. And I want to just ask you about that, because when the US Congress is deadlocked, CFTC and SEC is deadlocked, does Abu Dhabi or the UAE have an internal conversation saying, hey, these guys are in a bit of a spot, let's just get everyone here?
So, I mean, I'm sure that's how it looks from the outside, but let's be clear. There's no benefit to the world if you look for a regulatory race to zero, right? What we look to do in Abu Dhabi Global Markets is ensure that we have a sound framework, one that's based on principles, one that's based on fundamentals, that recognizes that virtual assets, crypto, is just another asset class, and that the same types of rules that apply to a financial institution, the things that make sure that you don't defraud your customers, that you don't steal your customers' money, that you don't do market manipulation, that you have enough capital to survive, that you have appropriate money laundering controls. These kinds of things are much better at building trust and ensuring that the ecosystem and the industry is sustainable than trying to chase a race to the bottom.
Okay, very briefly, since you say that it's just another asset class, is Ether a security?
So I think the specific concerns that the US has on how you deal with the definitions of a security may not necessarily apply in other jurisdictions. There is no commonly accepted definition of a security worldwide. You can ask IOSCO for that, right? And as yet, there still is no definition of that because each jurisdiction's context is different. I think international securities regulation and international regulation as a whole recognizes that there's a need for some level of convergence, there's some level of coordination, but there should still be some level of space for individual jurisdictions to address their own context. The use cases in the global south are completely different from the use cases in the G7.
Okay, so I just want to ask you, because it suggests from what you just said that you don't necessarily see this as an opportunity that if the US has lost it and is slow on this, then, well, we're going to climb up and take the bull by its horns. But look at the facts. Abu Dhabi has proposed legislative framework for distributed ledger technology. You are targeting disclosures, liquidation, and government structures. You have kicked off a $2 billion initiative to support Web3 projects. In Dubai, for example, which you cannot answer for, I understand, but they've enacted a regulatory framework. Dubai is clearly aiming to attract blockchain companies with its WARA. The UAE has unveiled federal licensing requirements. How do you then say that, well, we have a different use case, so we're just doing what we are doing, but we're not seeing this as an opportunity? Because the money is still in the US in many ways.
So let's be clear. I think there's a difference between recognizing that there's a strategic moment and seeking to take advantage of other people's misfortune. And we do not seek to do that, right? We recognize that, we have recognized for a very long time that virtual assets are a strategic focus for Abu Dhabi as well as the UAE. And I think what we have done so far has been in line with that flow. We came out with the first virtual assets framework, the first comprehensive virtual assets framework in 2018 in the region. We've had firms come to us over time. And I think what they've recognized is that having a sound regulatory framework with clear, predictable paths for change, etc., is itself a selling proposition. There is no need to take advantage of other people's situations.
Yeah.
We just need to do what we just need to continue doing what we've been doing.
All right, Rasuki, if I could come to you right now. I'm a bit confused about Japan. I remember distinctly I was driving somewhere in India and there was some news that broke and I had to stop the car and write a particular article at the time because it was about your stablecoin legislation that you had decided to come up with, which was very topical at the time. Can you just give us a sense, paint a picture of what has happened in Japan from Mount Cox to now? Very quickly.
Sure. Sure, that's a great question. And then, so we learned a lesson from the past high-profile incident like Mount Gox in 2014, as well as CoinCheck back in 2017 or 18, and then nearly $500 million US was stolen. And then, therefore, we developed a comprehensive regulatory framework as of 2016. So we require not only AML safety control, but also customer protection, like a segregation of customers' asset from corporate asset. And then that worked for the case of FTX incident. So Japan's customers are protected by the law, and then actually they got their fund back already. So it's I think it's one of the few countries that that achieved that. So we are kind of proud of that, and then it's a kind of a basic infrastructure for us. And then now we see some opportunities in Web3 space because we already have a good level of regulatory framework, and then now we don't see any further change, and then our stablecoin regulation will be put in place in June this year. So now we are trying to attract a lot of international Web3 industry to Japan and to Tokyo to potentially expand their business. And then a lot of people think Japan is conservative society, and then Japanese regulation is quite tight, so it's not good for the business. It may be good for the tourist or having food, but my job is to change that reputation. So Japan is friendly and then open to innovation, and then we accommodate such new technology. And of course, we are very much aware of risks. So our requirement is not that light.
Okay.
But we welcome healthy use case happening in Japan.
Yeah, I think he underplays his role as just changing the perception of Japan because Japan is also leading the G7. And if I'm not wrong, you're literally the person in charge of that, right, in a way?
Yeah, I'm not directly in charge of G7 discussion, but it's just my personal opinion. But yeah, Japan is chairing G7 this year. And then G7 leaders are, again, aware of the risks of, crypto and then, in general, kind of digital technologies. They could bring opportunities as well as risks. So when it comes to the crypto asset and the stablecoin discussion, one thing is about, financial stability. Another thing is about, money laundering and terrorist financing and then proliferation financing.
Yeah, so let me ask you about this because the G20 is saying all 20 countries, jurisdictions, including, of course, Europe, which will just come to Lisa, they have to coordinate. They have to come together on the rules. Otherwise, it won't work. But now the G7 is also there, and the G7 and G20 are not talking. So if the G20 is supposed to be talking on 20 jurisdictions, but the G7 and the G20 don't talk, then how is this going to work? Because they're not talking. There's no information out there that the G7 and G20 are coordinating.
Don't point at me. We're not the G20.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We're much more.
But I mean, come on. The IMF is leading the G20s.
No, that's for another panel. But
yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So the G7 is a smaller group of countries compared to the G20, but of course, we have to reach a consensus about what is the key message to the international community. So of course, our G7 leaders are discussing on what kind of message we should convey to the crypto asset and the Web3 industry. So and of course, G7 and the G20 are different body, but that message should be aligned. So and the IMF are joining both G20 and the G7 discussion. Of course, Japan is joining both discussions. So that's kind of harmonization.
Okay, we appreciate that. Okay, I have a very important question for Lisa. She's from UK,
Thank you.
representing that particular region that left Europe. I just want to understand this from you. How many people in the crypto space in the UK have said, why did you leave after MiCA was passed?
I think, you know, there's so much happening now in the UK crypto space that we are feeling very positive. There's a lot of momentum now in the Parliament. We've come from really a standing start. When I got involved in this sector to start with, one of my constituents had befallen a scam, and I was asked to find the person in the Parliament who was working on this. This was only 2 years ago. I set out to do this to give my constituent a good service, and I couldn't find anyone working on it. And my researcher said, you know, there's 3 million people in the UK invested in this sector. Why are we not doing more in the Parliament? So over the past, 18 months of the all-party parliamentary group, which is completely cross-party, House of Commons, House of Lords, we have had 2 debates in the Commons. We're really upskilling ourselves. You know, when we started, an industry would come into the Commons to speak to us, and you speak in a lot of jargon, I have to say. So some of the Lords would say, you know, why are we speaking about fiat? What's cars got to do with,
Good point.
finance? And we've really had to, do a lot of education. I include myself in this, of course. Over this period of time, we've had debates. We've now had numerous questions to government on banking issues, registration issues.
Yeah, let me help you with that. The
so
Financial
much.
Services and Markets Bill, it's gone through Parliament. It's going through Parliament, sorry.
Yeah.
You have a consultation on potential regulations for the sector that was published in February that proposes broad consumer protection rules. And also the UK Treasury Economic Secretary, Andrew Griffith, he told CNBC that the government hopes to set out specific legislation for crypto in the next 12 months. That's saying something, actually. And the UK's newly formed Department of Science, Innovation and Technology will advance the country's metaverse and Web3 strategy. But you're still behind the person on your right.
Well, we're not usually the first mover, I have to say, in spaces. We have the opportunity now, post-Brexit, whether people liked Brexit or not, it's where we are, we deal with it. And we have the opportunity to create our own bespoke regulatory framework now. We're taking our time to get this right. We're engaging regulators, we're engaging the sector. There's the sandboxes, there's so much happening now in government, and we're also trying to move in a very cross-party manner because we also know we're coming up to an election cycle next year.
I want to bring that up.
I believe this is going to be key for the UK's future.
I want to ask you about that because there was one particular day where we didn't know who was going to be the next Prime Minister in the UK, if you remember. and then, of course, as always, an Indian put his hand up. But I just want to understand from you, just explain this to me. How much does politics play a role in something that is very less in terms of priorities, crypto regulation? Because there's so much happening in the world. For example, in India, with 1.4 billion people, where we're like, yeah, we've become the world's largest population, which we shouldn't be, clearly, but we are. There's just so much else happening. We keep talking about crypto regulation, but in the US, in the UK, for example, it's difficult to get that cross-party coordination when, well, politicians are fighting.
Well, I mean, obviously people have their political differences, and I think the sector over the next year will, we're urging people to put together their manifestos and input into this, because I think we've set out that digital innovation and this space is going to be very, very key for the future, the metaverse, blockchain technology. We see the UK, and we want to level up across the UK, by the way, not just in London, but for all communities in the UK to make sure that there's inclusion at the heart of the work we're doing. So we really want to, and we have been working together. And the last thing I want as chair of the group is that with electoral changes, that we then move 5 steps back, because I think we have a time period here to really set out the stall for the UK. We don't usually, as I say, have first mover position, and that's fine, that's the way we operate. But we want to set out then what's this year. We're looking very closely at international best practice, regulatory standards, how to make sure that the UK is never a race to the bottom. We have consumer protection as the key, but that also we can harness the real opportunity of this sector moving forward together. And that's why it's very, very important that the all-party group is, as it says on the tin, all-party, that we have that engagement, but it's also members of the House of Lords, because all of our legislation has to move through both parliaments. And we're working very, very positively with the Minister. And I think, you know, it would be foolish for governments of the future to think that this is not going to be key and integral to progress and innovation for the future. So I think we all have made an investment in upskilling, learning, to try and make sure that the UK can have a leadership role in this sector.
I appreciate that. Just briefly, have you been in a room with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and did he say anything about crypto?
I've been in a room recently with the Chancellor and spoken about these issues, and I've also spoken very, you know, on a regular basis with the Minister, whose task is to take this forward, as you said, within the next 12 months. And we are working, as I said, right across party with government positively, because we all believe it's very important. Everything else that's going on, of course, is important too, but we can't, it would be neglectful, I think, not to understand the importance of this sector.
Absolutely. You know, this is the Crypto Policy Summit. We have two reporters who regularly are looking at what's happening in the UK, and I can tell you, Kamamile Shumba and Jack Schickler are reporters on our team. They've just been hammering out stuff with what's happening in the UK in the last 2 years. I want to come back to you out here, Marianne. So what are the challenges that you're already seeing between the IMF and FSB's collaboration towards what is known as a synthesis paper that will be presented to the G20? Like, is there something that you're like, we have to discuss and we're finding it difficult to come out, like get that common ground on?
So as I mentioned, the board paper that we issued had one component, which is regulation. And this is really the territory of the FSB, if I can call it that, the supervision and the regulation. And we made sure that our element, which is element 5, fully aligns with what the FSB is recommending, because this is what we do. As IMF, we disseminate and we help disseminate international standards with our membership countries. So I don't think on the level of finding consistency between, so it's going to be a synthesis paper, right, between what we are thinking as IMF, which is much broader than regulation, and then what they're thinking in terms of regulation, but we already made sure that there's alignment there. So in terms of inconsistency between the two, I don't think it would be challenging. I think it's very important that we sit together in the same room, as you mentioned, G20, IMF, G7, everybody, to kind of level what you're thinking and what you're recommending. Well, it is happening because we have till September to come up with this synthesis
but again,
paper.
that's just the G20. That's the IMF and the FSB.
That's the G20, but there was going to be also initiative with the G7 in terms of crypto. We've been talking.
This is news. What's going on?
No.
Seriously, this is news. We didn't know.
No, I mean, I think we're going to be working also together with the G7 on the regulation.
So the G20, the IMF. The IMF and the G7 are going to be
remember, because the IMF, we're nearly universal. We have 190 country, including, again, I would like to point that out, including low-income and emerging countries, not only G20 and G7. So, but yeah, so in terms of inconsistency between the two, I don't think there's going to be any, it's going to be challenging. Maybe between the countries themselves, there might be some areas where they would not like to harmonize because of traditional, because of politics, because of, you know, I cannot preempt what the conversation would be, but I will let you know as soon as.
Well, I will be taking you up on that offer. I appreciate that.
For sure.
Okay, there's another question I want you to answer, because you're also a senior legal counsel. Can you talk to the importance of legal and regulatory clarity or certainty, especially in terms of the classification of crypto, which is basically, as we were discussing behind, element 4 of the 9 elements that you referred to in the IMF paper. The SEC says everything apart from Bitcoin is a security, right?
I can't speak for the SEC, but I don't think that's entirely.
Yeah, I know. It indicates, okay? And the CFTC has indicated that it is a commodity. So in that context, because we have a US audience out here, effectively, so could you refer to what you're saying?
First of all, I'm very happy that you asked me this question because I'm a lawyer. So I can't speak for the US and the regulation. You know, every country has a specificity in terms of market development and laws and all that. But what we tried to push in this board paper in the 9 element 4 is actually, as you mentioned, the legal certainty. Because really, it's really the trigger of the application of regulation. You need to know what this creature is first, under the law and under the regulation, and this is why everybody's calling for clarity, and also the FSB are asking for clarity as well, and predictability. So basically, we don't have an answer. I'm not going to say we have an answer in this board paper, but we're putting forward the question that it's important that legal classification is clear, because it's the trigger for the regulatory application.
So what's stopping you from giving an answer?
Because first of all, we're not the regulators. We're the International Monetary Fund, the intergovernmental. So we don't regulate.
No, but you can advise.
We can advise, and that's what we have been doing. We've been getting a lot of questions from our members telling us, we want to regulate crypto. Come and let us know what we can do. And as as this panel is showing, if you stock take what's happening around the globe, there's no consistency yet. It's in the making, and it's a good thing, because it's the good time to harmonize if we want to harmonize, because everything is in the making. So we tell them, okay, you have the UK doing this, you have Japan doing this, you have to look into your own circumstances, your own legal tradition, and decide which way to go forward. But there's a lot of crystallization in terms of crypto being used as payment.
Yeah.
So, in Japan, this is the Payment System Act. Yeah. In Singapore, the DPT. So I really like to always point out that it's not good to put crypto all in the same basket and look at it in a vacuum, because there's a lot of clarity in certain area in crypto.
Okay.
For payment, for example. In securities, you have in Europe a lot of countries that have enacted laws for DLT issuance of securities. There's a lot of legal clarity there too. So you know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's not the perception of the industry, because the industry is still feeling like they say it all the time.
I understand it, and we had a 2-hour working group workshop earlier on regulation, the quest for global regulation, and what came out of it. One important thing is that awareness on both ends is very important for the industry. They don't really know what the regulation is about, and they should know more. And for the regulator, they need to know what the industry is about. So really, you would be surprised how many member countries come to us, central banks. They want to deploy DLT in their country. They want to leverage on technology, but they're afraid of it. So they really need to be educated, and I think the education and the awareness is very important. And as the IMF,
that's what you do.
That's what we're trying to do.
All right, awesome. Brian, I saw you nodding a few times, wanting to jump in. Feel free.
So I would make a couple of points, right?
Yeah.
First, I think the quest for clarity is, yes, there's an important thing for having clarity over your regulations. But I think what's more important is predictability, right? Saying, as I think Chair Clayton did in 2018, that every ICO is a security is clear, right? It's not clear that it was predictable, that it's something that could have come up. What is important is knowing what the growth path will be. So, going from 0 to 100 at 10 miles per hour intervals is very different from going from 100 to 0 instantaneously. So predictability is one thing that I think is really important. The second thing that I would make...
Sorry, now that you made that point, could you respond to that? Because literally, that's...
Predictability and clarity?
Yeah.
We had an earlier
this discussion.
So you need to know what rule applies to you, but you also need to know when this rule is going to be applied to you,
Exactly.
So if you're being told you're good and then someone comes to you and said, no, you're not.
Yep.
And I'm trying,
Lisa? Yeah, please go ahead, Rosie.
If I may. So I think there is a trade-off between clarity and flexibility. So if we give clear definition about a crypto asset or stable coins or DAO, something like whatever, it's good to give kind of clarity for the industry. But the technology is changing and its application is also changing quite fast. So if the definition is too static, maybe it's quite difficult for regulator to apply appropriate framework to the emerging businesses. So that's why I believe kind of discussion and engagement with private sector are quite important to have to share some understanding each other. We may have different philosophy, but maybe at least we could have something in common, like no one wants to use crypto asset as a means of fund to that North Korea purchase missile for that. So that kind of thing, kind of starting point for the discussion, and since that we can have more in-depth discussion.
Yeah,
Ladies and gentlemen, you have the perspective of the G7.
It's a part of opinion.
The thing here is that effectively we're trying to answer another question, Lisa. the US drives global economy, but since it's not driving crypto regulation right now, all of you are stepping up. And I just want to understand from you, are you noticing that narrative appropriately in terms of whether it's accurate? Or let's say tomorrow the US does come up with crypto regulation and says, well, we don't agree with the G20, we're going to do our own thing. What happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's very, very important that, you know, at high levels of government, there's going to have to be interoperability. So I think that there's going to have to be these discussions. Look, I was a psychologist before coming into the Parliament. My constituents obviously felt the House of Commons needed a psychologist.
Wow.
Everything starts and ends with discussion and consensus, actually, as we're here at the conference. We need to work on this together, and I think that's why it's important that we have everybody around the table and these issues that are ironed out. But that, I agree, also doesn't mean that we can't have individual flexibility and our own bespoke, you know, positions in relation to the sector moving forward. As you said, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister in the UK, has set out a vision that the UK should be a hub of cryptocurrency. We're working very, very hard to collectively move in the direction that can achieve.
What do you need? What else do you need? I just want to communicate on your behalf, give you the opportunity to send this clip out to, you know, everyone in the government in the UK, particularly the Prime Minister. What do you need? What more do you need?
Well, to be fair, government has been working, you know, in a very collegiate way with the all-party parliamentary group. So we do need to iron out many of the issues we have, particularly for companies who are finding it difficult to open bank accounts. I raised that in a question just last month to the Minister. I now have a meeting on that issue, being able to register in the UK and some of the issues with having engagement properly with the FCA and having feedback and it being a more streamlined process. We're trying to iron many of these issues out, but we are doing it collectively. So, you know, I feel my job is really to be raising the problems all the time, raising the issues, but making sure we get to the point where we make progress, because without these discussions and without the higher level discussions internationally, then, you know, I worry about a race to the bottom, and I think the UK never wants to have a race to the bottom, and particularly in, you know, the sector of fintech for the future. I think it's very, very important that we show leadership, and I'm pleased that government is doing that just now.
All right, she's happy with the government. That's great to know. 30 seconds, closing comments. I do want to just put a thought out there as you guys close. Feel free to, you know, add to this thought that there are other countries. There's an entire continent, Africa, 50+ countries. There's South America, not represented here. We tried to get everyone, as many people as we could, but, you know, there are limitations. So, Brian, why don't you just give out your closing comments?
So I think Lisa nailed it with the need for consensus. But I think we also need to ensure that consensus does not become a straitjacket, that you need to have a consensus, that different places have different circumstances, and you need to arrive at different consensuses for different regions.
Okay, Masuku?
Sure. So yeah, consensus is quite important, and we also need a kind of psychological safety when, you know, engaging with, you know, regulators. So we try to be more, you know, open-minded, and then we try to be kind of, you know, friendly. It doesn't mean we don't need a kind of lenient, so, but, you know, candid exchange of views between regulator and the private sector experts are the key to the sustainable development going forward.
I appreciate that, Maria.
Just to say that we're looking forward to continue the collaboration with all those international financial institutions and what's going to come out of it. And we'll continue to exchange experiences between member countries, because there's a lot to learn from everyone.
Okay, I appreciate that. We're completely out of time, but we had a poll that went. The audience answered that poll. The poll was, and you guys have to answer it now, right on stage, when does the US come up with crypto regulation? In this presidency, the next, or never? Go. Brian, you're first. Come on. Quickly, we got 10 seconds.
What were the options again?
When this presidency, the next, or never?
Pass. I think the question will be, when will it come up with crypto regulations that the industry likes?
Okay.
And the industry can abide with.
He dodged it. He dodged it. I'm not going to let you dodge it, Lisa.
I would like to see the US taking a leadership role sooner rather than
God,
later.
they're all
I think geopolitically that's really very important.
Okay. Suku?
Yeah, and then I'm co-chairing Financial Action Task Force Virtual Asset Contact Group together with US Treasury's colleagues. So, we are working together, and then we hope, we can, develop the regulatory framework
All right.
together.
Maria?
I have absolutely no answer.
There you go, guys. There you have it. There you have it. Well, thank you so much. Much
Thank you.
appreciated. Thank you.